You ready?
Yeah, I'll do a quick little intro and then I'll pass it off to you.
Okay.
One second. Welcome to the Putnam County Library Lunch and Learn. You're joined today by Ashely Kite-Rowland, and she'll be talking about healthy trees, healthy lives. Take it away, Ashely.
Okay, thank you. So I am Ashely Kite-Rowland. I'm the program coordinator for urban and community forestry here in the state of Tennessee. Today, the things that I was going to talk about, healthy trees, healthy lives, and how trees impact your health, I'm going to talk about that, but I'm also going to talk about urban and community forestry here in Tennessee and what I do as a program. Maybe I did need the clicker. There we go. Okay, first of all, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So I was born and raised in East Tennessee. I got my bachelor's degree in anthropology. It was cultural anthropology. After that, I did domestic violence work for a long time, and I worked in felony court systems, so I learned how to navigate systems at the local level. I moved out to West Tennessee after that, started a nonprofit for local food movement. And so what we did is just highlight the cool things that were going on in our community, getting people to go to farmers markets and to access local food. And then we start a lot of programming with farm to school activities. And that nonprofit is still going on. I went to graduate school after that, and my research was focused on children and the importance of access to nature for a child's development. And after that, I ended up getting a job with the Tennessee Division of Forestry and Urban and Community Forestry. I'm not a forester, but I'm super passionate about the outdoor environment and people having access to it. And I'm also pretty well versed in grant management, and so I do a lot of that with my job. And this is my little girl when she was little. She's 10 now, but I tried to get her outside as much as possible when she was little. Okay, so today I'll talk about urban and community forestry, just an overview of what I mean when I'm saying that. I'll talk about the benefits of trees and being outside in green space, current threats and responses that we're having here in Tennessee and in other areas. And then I'll talk about how we can grow thriving communities and healthy ecosystems. So growing community trees. So when I'm talking about urban forests and urban and community forests, there's a lot of acres of urban forests throughout our country. What it means is all the trees. You may be thinking forest. Usually if I say forest, you're thinking I need to go somewhere, like a state park or a national forest. It's somewhere you need to drive to go hiking. You're usually not talking about like a park downtown. But in urban and community forestry, we're concerned with all the trees, like in the community. So, you know, you have rural lands where it's large tracts of land, whether it be forest or agriculture. That's typically not urban and community forestry. It's where the people live, work, and play, like suburbs and in urban areas. So it's the trees in people's yards, it's street trees, it's the trees in the park out back, so it's Dogwood Park, so those parks, anything like that, those are your urban and community forest. So all of it, it's not just one place. In some places, when I'm talking about urban and community forestry, there are no trees. So you would have a lack of tree canopy, but that's still where your urban and community forest should be. And we want to work to remedy the lack of trees in those places. So homeowners or people, businesses, schools, local governments, all these people play a really important part in community forestry because I can't go in and plant trees in a lot of those spaces. I can't maintain them. All I can do is talk about the importance of them, and then people make the choices to do it themselves and then do it properly. In urban and community forestry, these are the types of things that we're concerned with. So we want to evaluate where there's trees. So if you have a parking lot and there's no trees around it, we could say, hey, you can plant trees there. So we evaluate for a whole community where trees are, maybe where flooding is, where it's super hot downtown. So we look at that data and then we make plans. So if you have an area that floods or has standing water, you could utilize trees to help soak up that water and remedy some of the flooding. Or if you have an area that's super hot, maybe you built a greenway, like no one is going to the greenway and using it. So you spent all this money putting down this cement path and you're like, no one is using it. Well, maybe it doesn't have trees, and so during July and August, no one's going there because it's super hot. So you would look at different data like that and then make plans to use nature and trees as a nature-based solution to the issues that you're having. Then we try to talk about, we try to get people to plant trees properly. We are not taught how to plant trees in school. And when you plant a tree improperly, you're really impacting its lifespan and its health. So we talk to people about planting the right tree in the right way, in the right place. Because if you put a white oak underneath the power line, there's no way that that tree is going to reach maturity, because it's going to have to be pruned because it would interfere with the power line. So putting the right tree in the right place is really important if you want it to reach maturity. And then you have to maintain your trees. You're managing all the trees together in your urban and community forest. And then we like for people to utilize the wood, because trees have to come down. The utility companies have to trim the trees out of power lines. Sometimes when you're expanding your house, you want to cut down the trees, or if you're building, you want to cut down the trees. Well, the wood is really valuable. And so we like for people to utilize the wood instead of sending it to the landfill, which oftentimes, sadly, is what happens. So even if people are chipping it for mulch, that's better than wasting it. We like for people to use it to its highest use though. So chipping isn't as good as turning it into boards, like for utilization that way, but it is better than wasting it and sending it to the landfill. So these things are what I work with communities on, all those different levels. And these are all the different levels of communities that I'm working with. So I want individuals to really care about trees and how they impact our lives. And I want individuals to go outside and be around trees as much as possible. Why? Because they have the yards, they have the voice in their communities. So individuals, if they don't care, working at the other levels of society doesn't matter, because they're all made up of individuals. So I work with individuals, work with institutions, so schools, workplaces, businesses, trying to get them to plant and maintain their trees, and then looking at policy. So you have tree ordinances, and that's where your local government can maintain certain levels of tree care and that kind of thing. So I work in all these different levels all the time. But individuals make up each stage. So you have to really touch hearts and minds if you want to make a difference. So I could talk about the benefits of community forest for a long time. And today what I'm going to do is hit on the high points, and then I'll get into some specifics about children, because that's where my research is, but it relates to adults too, like this specific research that I know about. So the benefits of community forest, most people think about the environmental benefits first. So you're looking at your air filtration, so filtering the particulate matter out of the air. So if you have trees beside a road, so the road throws off debris and things like that, the trees can keep the dust down and filter the particulate matter from the air. So if you have asthma and things like that, it's really going to help. Or if you don't have asthma, it's going to help not have issues with things getting in your lungs. Also water, so trees soak up water. If you have an area that stands in water, vegetation there helps. Also, it helps with erosion and flood control along waterways and things like that. Heat, that's an easy one. I grew up in East Tennessee, so we didn't have indoor air conditioning because we lived up in the mountains, but it still got hot, and my mama was a canner, so when she was canning green beans and tomatoes and things like that, it was so hot. And so we would always sit outside under the big trees and break beans. Why do we sit under the big tree? Because it's significantly cooler under shade trees than it is if you don't have trees. And so trees really help with heat, and especially in urban areas when we have asphalt and just these hard spaces with no green, it is super duper hot, and trees can help lower that heat. Because these are places, maybe people don't have transportation, so they're having to use public transportation. So at a bus stop, it's super hot. Or maybe you have to walk to work or school or walk to the library. If you don't have trees along those walkways, not only can the walk be super unpleasant, it can be very dangerous. It's crazy that here in the United States we have heat-related deaths every year because people don't have access to cool places. And trees are ways that we can help with that. Also biodiversity, Trees help with biodiversity in an atmosphere. You have different types of trees, and then those attract different animals, insects, that kind of thing. And then they're providing habitat for those as well. So I feel like most people know, like when you're thinking about trees, that's what you automatically go to. But trees are also good in the community for economic reasons. Studies have shown that downtown areas that have trees, people will spend more time there. And then when they're spending more time there, they're more likely to spend money at the businesses. Or if you have a shopping center somewhere and you have trees in the parking lot and it's nice to walk along the sidewalks, then you're more likely to continue your walk in the same way. Like if you're not downtown, you're going to spend more time in those spaces because it feels differently. I mean, I think we all know what the experience feels like when you're in a tree space and when you're just in this hot parking lot. And so it's hard to quantify that, but it is a different experience and people do spend more money in those instances. Economic reasons too is stormwater capture. So communities spend a lot of money on gray infrastructure. So that's like your pipes and your sidewalks and your roads and everything. And so all that water has to go somewhere. And when you have green infrastructure, so trees and vegetation, it's helping soak that water up and prevent that really heavy load after a rain because there's nowhere else for it to go except the pipes. So the trees and the vegetation help slow it down. And you can have a longer lifespan with that. So small business development too, you have tree care companies. Like I said, you have people spending more money at the stores and that kind of thing. You have people consulting to plant trees, so that kind of stuff. But also housing prices are higher where there are trees than they are if there are no trees in a neighborhood, especially mature trees. So if you have a neighborhood with mature trees, those houses are likely to be more expensive than a neighborhood that has no trees at all. And then finally, it can help with tourism economically. For the community, trees help with a sense of cohesion. I live in West Tennessee right now, and Dresden experienced a tornado. I think it was a couple years ago. We've had so many disasters in Tennessee that it's hard to remember, but during this tornado, they lost a lot of trees. And so it helps with your sense of place. So I don't know where you grew up, if there were trees in your yard or in your community and that kind of thing, but you form attachments to trees and how they feel. And when you lose something like that, maybe to a tornado, or you leave that house or the tree has to come down eventually, it can really impact you as a person because it does contribute to your sense of place. So after a disaster, when you've lost so many things and then you've lost your trees that take hundreds of years to grow, it's very devastating because it's not something you can build back over time. So that's what I mean by sense of place. Our environment really shapes where we feel at home. And then lower crime rates and cohesion, that's because people spend more time outside when there's trees and where there's trees. So there was a study done in Illinois at public housing. One had trees, one did not. The one with trees had lower rates of crime than the other one. And this was by Frances Kuo, so it's K-U-O. And she did lots of different studies, but it's not the trees or the lack of trees that are making people commit crimes. It's what it does to the humans that live there. People are more likely to spend time outside. In those settings, there were more people outside talking to each other, different ages were playing, and so there was less crime, I think, because people were alienated from one another. They knew their neighbors, there was a visibility outside, and so it does create that sense of cohesion in a community. And then for individual health and well-being, I'll dive into that a little bit more, but trees are good for asthma, like we talked about the air. People have greater physical activity with stress. It lowers levels of cortisol in the body. So they've done studies when you spend time in green space, the stress hormones in your body are actually reducing, and that's incredible. And so for children, ADHD and autism behaviors in schools also see a reduction when they have access to green space. And so I'm really going to get into talking about children because that's what my research is on, but I want you to realize that trees and the environments we choose to be in impact us at all ages of our lifespan. And it's important to have access to the outdoors and green space no matter how old we are. And I want to talk about something else too. It's not just access to green space. When we're driving down the road, if we are driving along a boulevard that has trees, so you know, boulevard, trees in the middle, that kind of thing, we can design those roads where people drive more slowly and less dangerously. So when you have these tree-lined spaces, people go slower. And then if you add a little curvature, that's even more amazing. So trees can lower speed in the places that people drive. In your house, when you're looking outside, if you can see, like I can see a tree right now, you can get the benefits of being in green space from being able to see green space and trees from your windows. So how we design our homes and the buildings where we spend our time is really super important, because you can still get those numerous benefits, like lowering of stress. So if you think about how, maybe, I don't know where you're sitting right now, but can you see outside? And if you can't, are you taking time to go outside during the day so you are seeing green space or getting some sunlight, because it's really important. Some studies have shown even looking at nature on your screen can give some benefits. It's not the same as spending time in nature, but it is a workaround, at least, just to see nature and trees on your screen. Because if you don't have a window, surely you have a screen wherever you are. So for children, like I said, my research was on children's access to green space and the importance of that in childhood development. I specifically looked at schools and childcare centers because children spend a lot of their lives there. In early childhood, if your parents are working, most of your awake hours are likely to be spent in school or a childcare center, and so it's a perfect place to provide children with these benefits. And then also it's important because after us parents pick up our school children or children from a childcare center, we have to feed them, bathe them, or we have them involved in lots of activities. So it's very unlikely that they will have this access unless their parents are ensuring that they have time outdoors. So for children, they've shown that access to green space at childcare centers and schools and just in general increases physical activity, which lowers obesity rates and also the behavioral problems and things I was talking about. They have greater balance, agility, and coordination. So if you think about what children are doing outside, they're moving in a very different way than they would if they're playing sports. Like there's certain movements that you're doing in sports. Or if you have a play structure and your parents only let you climb up and then go down the slide, you're not allowed to climb up the slide for whatever reason. We have rules about these things. So we control how our children use play structures. But outside, like if they have a log, they can balance on that. Like they can find anything to explore in the natural world if we allow them to. But also they have an increase in their immune system. So they're accessing things in the environment that are helping them be healthy. And then there's numerous other things on the screen: better sleep, greater brain density, things like that. Also, it says on here, better nutrition. This goes back to the farm to school stuff I did and exposing children to gardening. Some children can be really picky eaters, but when children grow things, they're really likely to eat it. And since children are learning what it means to be human, you want them to eat those things early in life because they're learning what food is. So we have this idea that there's children's foods and there's adult foods, and there's just food. And so we're teaching them how to be human. So if they're growing vegetables and fruits, they're more likely to eat them. And then they're getting healthier nutrition, and they're likely to maintain that throughout life. Children love gardening, and they like getting dirty if we let them do that. They like to water, they like to overwater, and that's okay. So for green space and children's mental health, I want to go back. So this was about children's physical development and health. So these are specific research articles I know of. However, it applies to more than just children, for adults too. So my research is specifically on children, but adults who garden are more likely to have better nutrition. Adults who are outside, spending more time outside in green space and that kind of thing, are normally going to participate in more physical activity. So although it says children, you can kind of think about it more broadly as humans. I sleep better when I'm outside too. So for mental health, for children, there's a reduction in anger, and perceived stress. So I talked about cortisol levels going down outside and just the calming impact of being outdoors. The behavioral issues in children are likely to be lower if they have access to green space and physical activity, really. But their attention and concentration increases as well. One thing that I looked at was increased resiliency in coping with stressful events. So there's a lot of brain formation going on early in life, and children are super resilient. But if your brain is constantly flooded with cortisol and other stress hormones, it can impact the development and what's going on. And so if you live in poverty, or if you have violence that you're encountering when you're at home or in your neighborhood or wherever you are, that is a lot for a little brain. It's a lot for any human. So if we can provide these nourishing spaces in our schools and childcare centers, I don't understand why we wouldn't, so that all children have access to this. So like if you're experiencing this stress and you're overloaded at home, then when you come to these places that you go to every day, it's a really nurturing experience. So if it is lowering stress hormones, then why wouldn't we provide children with that outlet? Because it seems simple to me. It's not an active intervention. It's providing a built environment that is healthy and nourishing for children. So I think it would help with those things. With cognitive development, so children have increase in academic and performance. If you have experiential learning outdoors, I think it's more fun. You will probably think it's more fun if we're outdoors walking in the park right now. So children are more enthusiastic about learning if it's not boring. And then there's other things on there. For communication skills, when children play outside, you can see different leadership that emerges. So if you have a play structure or sports, your physical fitness really matters. And typically the children that have the greatest physical fitness are going to be leading the pack. But when you're outdoors and you're just playing in nature, that changes. Imagination is really important. So you see different types of leaders and leadership emerge when children are playing in natural environments. And so there is more room for inclusion. And then that's my little girl again. Really importantly, when children have access to green space, they care more about the environment. So if they grow up loving nature, they're going to be more likely to care about it when they're older and spend time in that place. So if I'm wanting people to care about Candy Forest and plant trees when they grow up, it's really important to me that they have good positive experiences when they're young and they consider trees and nature as part of what it means to be human. So they're more likely to be stewards of their environment when they get older. But whether you're a child or an adult or anyone, your access to green space is limited. It matters where you live, whether you live in a rural area or an urban area. Or if you have a place a yard that you're in every day that you could plant trees in and have vegetation. Those things matter. And when I moved to a rural area, I thought that I would have more access to green space, but that's actually not true, because in rural areas, it's private land owners mostly. And so I'm not a private land, well, I have a house like in the community, but I don't have a large piece of land. And so I'm dependent upon the parks that we have, and we have one greenway, which I'm super happy about. So children in rural areas do not necessarily have access to green space. So it's rural and urban matter. Also, the neighborhood you live in. Some neighborhoods have more trees than other. Sometimes this is related to, you can look at maps of redlining and investment in communities, and the communities that we're invested in have more canopy coverage than the communities that don't. And we're trying to address these things so that all people have access. But also your lack of local and regional parks. Maybe you don't have a car, so you're having to walk to the park, and that walk is really hot, or there's no sidewalks, which is often the case. So you're not going to the park. For children, if parents don't spend time around trees, then the children aren't going to spend time around trees unless they're offered those opportunities at school childcare centers, or if they're still allowed to go outside and play, like at their house. So parents and their behaviors really impact children. And then there are social and cultural issues where some people don't feel welcome maybe you have a park, but not everyone feels welcome there. or maybe access is limited because of different abilities. So we have to think about all those things when we're trying to provide everyone with trees and green space. That's not working. And this, so I told you I looked at child care centers and parks and things, for children. So this is one child care center I looked at specifically. It has really great equipment. So in talking about parks, like we may have parks with great equipment, and this is a child care center, great equipment. I bet that gets hot. If you think about the parks you have in town and the equipment that we have for children to play on, is the equipment in the shaded area? Are there benches along the edges for parents to sit? If not, it's going to impact the usage of that environment, because it's in midday, it's going to be hot. And if there's nowhere for adults to sit, especially in the shaded area, they're not going to stay long, most likely. So you can have really cool equipment, but if you don't have the natural environment to go with it, it impacts how it's used. So this is better, cool equipment, but you see that feels differently to me. And so this one is likely used differently and more often, like in the heat of summer and that kind of thing. Because again, this is by a parking lot and a road. So where we put the playgrounds, we could spend thousands of dollars on equipment, but if we don't invest in the natural environment to go with it, then we may not be fulfilling the purposes that we had in the first place. Same thing with greenways and walking paths. Like you need to think about how it feels to be in that space. So like I said, this applies to playgrounds, childcare centers, sidewalks, when people have to use public transit. So if you look at the places that the bus stops often are, it is nowhere that you want to sit usually. So we can do better in just thinking about it. Like when you leave here or when you go outside today, just think about where the trees are and where people are having to use things like that, and how minor things can make the experience so much better. And it's not only the experience, you are benefiting human health and well-being in doing that. So this was just, so air temperatures directly under trees can be 20 to 45 degrees cooler than air in unshaded areas. That's significant, and that's gonna impact human behavior, like if you don't have those. So what impacts our community forest? Let's see what time it is. So if you have trees in your community or in your yard or wherever you are, or you go to a park, yay, that's great. And you are benefiting from that whether you recognize it or not. But we do have things that are impacting our trees that we have to think about. We have extreme weather events. We just had Helene. We had the tornado out where I live. Waverly flooded. I'm sure you guys have had your own natural disaster here recently. There's the increase in temperature, increases in flooding, so everything is just extreme. And there's the introduction of invasive species. All of these things impacted the health of our community forest. This was an ice storm in Memphis. So awesome trees, a lot of those were damaged due to the ice storm. So you can have great things, but it can be damaged by this extreme weather. So we have to be thinking always about planning for the future. So while we have big trees, we need to have younger trees coming up, because eventually these will have to come down. And it takes a long time to grow a tree. This is some of the flooding in Newport from Helene. So with flooding and things like that, there are things we can do to help mitigate some flooding. This was an unprecedented event, but we want to design our communities and have nature-based solutions to help prevent flooding. Helene was something that we had never considered. So maybe it will change how we're thinking about things in the future, but I don't think that we could design a solution to that. Also, something that's impacting our community forest is urbanization. So I'm sure here in Cookeville, you all have seen this, like the best farmland now grows houses. So often, if you're developing something and it has trees, I'm sure it's easier to clear off all the trees and then go in and build. But it's not necessarily what's best for the environment or the health of the forest or the health of the people that are going to live there.
That's what I never understood. You've got this walk, and it's got trees on it. So situate the house to take advantage of those trees.
I think so too. Like it's if you just pause
Yeah.
and do it.
Step back and look.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I've said that, I've been up here 28 years, I'm from Florida.
Mhm.
And I look and I go, well, even out here on Spring Street, yeah, it was pretty much desolate over there where they built the new apartments, but still, they don't seem to be putting any trees in.
Yeah. So in some communities have things called tree banks, and so there's policies and things, regulations that guide development. So if you go in and you're building something and there's trees there, they look at how the services those trees are providing the community, and then they ask that developer to either don't remove the trees, or plant trees, or they have to put money into a tree bank, and then that tree bank is used to plant trees in other places in town. So some communities do have regulations about that, but if you don't, then more than likely a tree lot will become a bare lot. And if they're mature trees, even if you're planting trees after you develop, it's not the same. The tree has to grow. And so you're right. So, but this is a really familiar site in Tennessee. We're losing a lot of farm and forest land to rapid development.
What are they gonna do when we run out of farmland? How are we gonna grow our food?
I know, and it's not to say like people stop coming here, because I know after COVID people realized that Tennessee's awesome and people want to move to Tennessee, and I get it. Tennessee is great, but we have to plan, like that we have to be better planners and users of our land and our natural resources.
Yeah.
I mean, and
Well,
what's
even-
going on now is just not
Even down
happening.
in Florida, I've been up here 28 years almost, and I went back in the spring for a wedding, and just in the 3 years it had been since I've been down there, I'm going, where's all our trees? Granted, most of our trees were palm trees,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Some smaller trees, but nothing like we have here.
Right.
And I go, it's all concrete. Why?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's necessary.
I didn't either. And when you have concrete, the water can absorb in the ground. Things can't grow.
The water table is not real deep anyway.
Right.
But
But palm trees are better than no trees. For sure.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I can remember when our lovely President Trump first came to Palm Beach County, and he built a golf course next to the jail facility, and all he put in was the great big coconut palms, which grow really tall,
Mm-hmm.
but there's no shade.
Right.
I-
And Florida's hot.
Yeah,
You need shade.
Why do you think I'm in Tennessee?
A number of reasons. Yeah, Florida's hot, and so the trees really make a difference.
Yeah, and you know, the hurricane seasons that they've been having down there, I've still got a sister and a son that live down there, and I look at them and a niece, I said, when are you all gonna get out of Florida?
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, when are you going to get out of Florida?
Right.
Because it's not the way it was when you were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even what it was when my kids were growing up. And my kids are, well, my oldest is in his 50s and my twins are 47. But it's not the same.
Mm-mm. No, not at all.
No. I'm old fashioned.
I am too, kind of. And this is what, so usually, so if I go back and I'm talking about flooding and changing climate and all the benefits of trees, so usually like our response is, we're just gonna go plant 1,000 trees, or we're gonna plant like all these trees. We have Tennessee Tree Day and Arbor Day, and not to diminish these things, but I feel like that's the humans, as a human, I feel like when we have a problem, like we just wanna like solve it. And that's kind of an easy way, and everyone loves planting a tree. I don't know if you've ever planted a tree, but everyone wants to show up for a tree planting. People do not want to show up to water the trees for the next 3 years or to remove invasive species as often. You know, I mean, the other work isn't as fun. So you go and you plant a tree and you're like, oh, good job. And I still love planting trees, but I really want people to understand that this isn't the answer by itself. Like, plant trees, but also be thinking about maintaining the trees that we have, because they're providing so much more in their large state. So I feel like this is an easy answer. Say we're just gonna plant more trees. It's like, let's maintain, let's plan, let's evaluate where they're needed, and then once we plant them, let's maintain them so they actually live. Because oftentimes when we have these massive tree planting things, we're not looking at survivability. So are they being maintained? Are they being watered? How long are they surviving? And so, like I said, not to diminish this, but this is our go-to response to what's happening. And so let me say, like, the trees are obscuring the bigger view of the forest and everything that we need to be thinking about. And this is another commonly adopted approach that I see, is like, it's one organization or one person like trying to take it all upon themselves. And when we're talking about community forest, as I said, it's individuals, local government, you have businesses, maybe you have people, you plant trees, but the people didn't really want them there, so they can sabotage it. So it takes more than one person solving this issue. It requires people coming together to grow healthy community forest. And so I don't know if you guys have heard of the book Finding the Mother Tree. It's talking about the fungal systems like underground. It's by Susan Simard, S-I-M-A-R-D. Great book. We're at the library. If they have it, check it out. But it's talking about like interactions of fungi and mycorrhizal networks in the soil. And so what this is saying is that trees are complex communicative systems. And so we need to think about nature and how it's complex and it's always interacting with itself. And then humans are interacting with it too. And so when we are talking about growing community forest, we need to be thinking about the complex world that we live in and not say it's just an individual that's gonna go out and solve that problem. Because you can go plant trees in this park all day long, but if you don't have public works on board or whoever's mowing, they can kill those trees with their weed whackers really quickly. And a lot of people don't like to mow around trees, and so you really have to get people behind your initiatives if you want your outcomes in a mature community forest to be seen to reality. So I like to talk to people about being interconnected and forming relationships instead of going it their own way. Because we are part of a complex system, whether we like to think about it or not. So for growing community trees and healthy community forests, so I feel like all of these networks can come together. And so here in Cookeville, you all recently received a Inflation Reduction Act grant from the Urban and Community Forestry Program, which I'm the coordinator of. And so one of the goals is to develop a food forest in one of your parks. So there's a new nonprofit developing here in Cookeville called Friends of Cookeville Food Forest or something like that, I think. But it'll be a newly developing nonprofit. And so what the park will have is edible plants and stuff that's growing for the public to eat when they're outdoors. And then another part of that project is to plant trees in another part of town. But check it out. If you look up Inflation Reduction Act, Cookeville Food Forest, it will bring up that project that's going on. So that's one part of bringing people together and forming community around trees and that kind of thing. So for the state's role, I can't come to your community and plant trees. So what I see our purpose as is to be a catalyst. So to talk about the importance of trees, to give people resources, but to catalyze people in communities to take action or to want to do something where they live, work, and play. Also, we serve as a connector, so connecting people to resources, ideas. Maybe there's another cool project going on in Nashville, Chattanooga, Jackson. So connecting those nonprofits together or people connecting those ideas, because it's crazy. Oftentimes super cool things are going on and we have no idea, even though we have this really connected world with social media. We don't often know what's going on in our sister communities. And then also we see ourselves as a conduit. So what I mean by that, because I had someone say, a connector is a type of conduit. Yes. Connector, I mean like taking two things and like putting them together. Conduit, I mean something through which other things flow. So that would be like technical resources. We can come out and do workshops and provide education on tree planting, tree care, canopy assessments, things like that. But we also provide financial resources. So we have funding available every year for tree planting projects, canopy assessments, maintenance, and then this Inflation Reduction Act project that was recently funded is an example of that. Also, you all have an urban forester here in Cookeville. Her name is Jamie Noonan. She's awesome. Cookeville usually applies for tree planting funds every year through our program. They did again this year. You have a tree board here in Cookeville. And so it's important to know about the things that you have going on. And then if you want to be engaged, those would be great ways to get connected to what's going on. So again, we provide different types of financial system at the state level. And then today's topic was talking about healthy trees, healthy lives. And I know I went kind of off script from that, but this is a national campaign. So this is the website. There's tons of resources on here, and there are research articles that people can access to look at how trees are impacting human health and well-being. And a lot of it you may already know just because of your experience of being human, but it's the research showing that yes, when you feel better after you go outside and you're in the woods, like research shows it is actually benefiting you. Like you don't only feel better, you're healthier, like as a person. So check out Healthy Trees, Healthy Lives. And then there's some other resources related to urban and community forestry. American Forest has a tree equity score. So you can type in your zip code and it will show like if the tree canopy is equitably distributed in your community. And you can look up public health outcomes that are associated with census blocks and things like that. It's really cool to look up like where you're at. There's the environmental justice screening and mapping tool. The tree equity score, I think it's easier to use. Children in Nature Network, lots of resources on children if that's your thing. And then there's farm to school resources as well. But I think what I want you to hear more than anything is that if you really care about trees or you want more trees in your community and you want to be part of that, you can make a difference. You can make a difference if you own a house where you can plant trees, because most of the time when you rent, you can't. If you have a place like that, the trees that you plant in your yard and the health of your yard contributes to the health of the community forest. But if you don't, you can engage in other ways. You can engage with your local government in parks, you can work with schools, childcare centers. There are ways to engage, and so don't doubt your ability to be engaged. I think that oftentimes we feel like we can't make a difference. We may care an awful lot, but we feel like what we have to say doesn't matter. And I just encourage you to know that your voice does matter, and that getting out there and advocating for whatever it is you want to advocate for, you can really make a difference. And so don't hold yourself back when you're passionate about something, because it's the only thing that's ever changed the world is by people coming together and speaking out. And lastly, I'll say thank you for listening. And Dolly Parton, this was a National Geographic article, but she was saying that mistreating Earth is like being ugly to your mama. And it is. And so I'm from East Tennessee, and Dolly Parton's not far from there. And so Tennessee's a great state. And so I hope that we can take care of it. And thank you very much. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you, Ashely.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Very informative.
Thank you.
I wish there were more people here to hear this.
We got a bunch of, well, we got a couple on here, so yeah,
know,
5
that's
total,
okay.
including you.
Okay.
That is just fine. I can come back another time. Did you eat your lunch?
We would love to have
I
you
ate
back.
when I could.
Okay,
I don't eat a lot.
I understand. Yeah, I'll come back anytime, and I can do different parts of this presentation, whatever you need. Honestly, my daughter was in the state soccer tournament last week, and so I was like, I would have done just the health thing, but I just had limited amount of time this weekend, so I was like, I'm just gonna do a broad presentation. I think it went great.
It did.
You did fine.
Yeah, this is great.
Thank you. Don't look at my screen.